Bhagavate. Scary.
Yeah. Means we have to be careful.
A marvelous sun looked down from ecstasy's sky on words of deathless bliss, perfection's home. God's everlasting day surrounded her. Domains appeared of sempiternal light, invading all nature with absolute joy. Beneath a triple mystic heaven, the seventh immortal earth where she survived, homes of the blessed, released from death and sleep, where grief can never come, nor any pain. Eternal mountains ridge on the gleaming ridge, whose lines were graved as on sapphire plate, and etched the borders of heaven's lustrous noon, climbed like fine temple stairs, and from their ends of topless meditation heard below the approach of a blue pilgrim multitude, and listened to the great arriving voice of the wide travel hymn of timeless seas. In cities cut like gems of conscious soul, and wonderful pastures, and on gleaming coasts, bright forms were seen, eternity's luminous skies, above her rhythming the Godhead's world, the spheres, wrapped mobile fixities, here blindly sought by the huge erring orbits of our stars. Immortal harmonies fill her listening ear. A great spontaneous utterance of the heights, on titan wings of rhythmic grandeur born, poured from some deep spiritual heart of sound, strange trembling with the secrets of the gods. In the harmony of an original sight, she saw all nature marvelous without fault, endless as far the climbing of those heavens, real wandering, or seemed her soul inhale, controllers counted to the ear, the odes of that shape, the universal thought. The lines that tear the veil from Deity's face, the wind that brings the sound of wisdom's seas, the words of an infinite reach, crowned nature's stir, sunlit is the soul's vision, and moonlight is gleam. Into those heights her spirit went, floating up. A secret splendor rose, revealed the sight, where once the vast embodied void had stood. Night, the dim mask had grown a wonderful face. The vague infinity was slain, whose gloom had outlined from the devil unknown the obscure, disastrous figure of a god. As if the cosmic calyx of a flower, aerial, visible on music's waves, a lotus of light, petaled ecstasy, took shape out of the tremulous heart of things. This somber count was cast from nature's ground. There lightened on earth the Godhead lurking love. All grace and glory and all divinity were here collected in a single form. All worshipped eyes looked through his from one face. He bore all Godhead in his grandiose limbs.
Good morning, everyone. So for some time, I've been looking forward to reading the last page of Book 10, Canto 4, but things have worked out differently. In my perception, which is far from faultless, I have the feeling that in those last pages, Savitri explains to death about an ascending series of worlds of knowledge. Perhaps some of you also remember, and you like to look back at that section. But anyway, what has happened is death has been defeated. Savitri and Satyavan are left alone. The dire universal shadow disappeared. That's this god of death. Satyavan and Savitri were alone, but neither of them moves. Between those figures, between Satyavan and Savitri, it's as if an invisible wall which allows light to pass through it. So in that long blank moment, nothing could move. All waited on the unknown, inscrutable will. What is going to happen next? So in that way, Book 10, Canto 4 ends. And we heard Mother's beautiful reading about what Savitri experiences next. I can't see the page number.
No, 71.
671. It's the first page of the next book. You like to start reading, Miho?
Book 11, the Book of Everlasting Day. Canto 1, the eternal day, the soul's choice, and the supreme consummation. A marvelous sun looked down from ecstasy's skies on worlds of deathless bliss, perfection's form, magical unfoldings of the eternal smile, capturing his secret heartbeat of delight. God's everlasting day surrounded her, domains appeared of semi-eternal night, invading all nature with the absolute joy. Her body quivered with eternity's touch. Her soul stood close to the fount of the infinite. Infinity's finite thrones she lived in, new forever to an ever-living sight. Eternity multiplied its vast self-loop, translating its endless mightiness and joy into delight souls playing with time could share. In grandeurs ever newborn from the unknown depth, in powers that leaped immortal from unknown heights. In passionate heartbeats of an undying love, in scenes of a sweetness that can never fade, immortal to the rapturous heart and eyes, in serene arches of a translucent calm. From wonders, dream vast, cloudless skies fly down, on eddies of a sapphire, sunlight visited eyes, which suffered without pain the absolute way, and so immortal varieties of form. twilight and mist were exiles from that air. Night was impassable to such radiant heavens, found in the bosom of immensity. Spiritual breath was seen, sublimely born from a still beauty of creative joy.
Thank you.
Embodied in thought to three dimensions held, to please some carelessness of divine peace, answer the deep demand of an infinite sense and its need of forms to house its bodiless thrill. A march of universal powers in time, the harmonic order of cells fast fused in cyclic symmetries and metallic planes harbored a cosmic raptures revelry, an endless figuring of the split in things planned by the artist who has dreamed the world.
Thank you.
I lost the page. I'm sorry, I lost the page.
We're a little way down, page 672. We're still on the first page, Marianne.
I guess the Canto 4, the green twilight, and then on the page. Book 11.
You will need to continue from line 40 to finish the sentence.
Line 40.
From 40 to 40.
Dana, you'll read.
Of all the beauty and the marvel here, of all time's intricate variety, eternity was the substance and the source. Not from a plastic mist of matter made, they offered the suggestion of their depths and opened the great series of their powers. Arisen beneath a triple mystic of all the beauty and the marvel here, of all time's intricate variety, eternity was the substance and the source. Not from a plastic mist of matter made, they offered the suggestion of their depths and opened the great series of their powers. Arisen beneath a triple mystic heaven, the seven immortal earths were seen, sublime. Homes of the blessed, released from death and sleep, where grief can never come, nor any kind. Arriving from self-lost and seeking worlds, alter heaven nature's changeless quietude and mighty posture of eternal calm, its force of ecstasy immutable.
Thank you. Tinaka, will you go on?
expanse of God's bright sleep. Thought's wings climbed up towards heaven's vast repose, lost in blue deeps of immortality. A changed earth nature felt the breath of peace. Air seemed an ocean of felicity, or the couch of the unknown spiritual rest. A vast quiescence swallowing up all sound to a voicelessness of pathologies. Even matter brought a close spiritual touch. All thrilled with the imminence of one divine. The lowest of this earth was still a heaven, translating into the splendor of things divine, the beauty and brightness of terrestrial scenes. Eternal mountains ridge on gleaming ridge, whose lines were graved as on a sapphire plate, and edged the borders of heaven's lustrous moon, climbed like tiled temple stairs, and from their heads of topless meditation heard below the approach of a blue pilgrim multitude, and listened to a great arriving voice of the white travel hymns of timeless seas.
Thank you.
A chanting crowd from mountain booths, a chanting crowd from mountain bosoms slipped, past branches fragrant with the sigh of flowers, hurrying through sweetnesses with gravel leaves. The murmurous rivers of felicity, divinely rippled honey-voiced desires, mingling their sisters' eddies of delight, then, widening to a pace of calm-lit hues, down many glimmered estuaries of dream, went whispering into lakes of liquid peace. On a brink held of senseless ecstasy, and guarding an eternal poise of thought, sat sculptured souls dreaming by rivers of sound, in changeless attitudes of marble bliss. Around her lived the children of God's day in an unspeakable felicity, a happiness never lost, the immortal's peace, a glad eternity's blissful multitude. Around, the deathless nations moved and spoke, souls of luminous celestial joy, faces of stark beauty, limbs of the molded ray. In cities cut like gems of conscious stone, and wonderful pastures and on gleaming coasts, bright forms were seen, eternity's luminous tribes. Above her, rhyming godheads whirled the spheres. Wrapped mobile fixities were here blindly sought by the huge airy orbits of our stars. Ecstatic voices smote at hearing's chords. Each movement found a music all its own. Songs thrilled of birds upon unfading bows, the colors of whose plumage had been caught from the rainbow of imagination's wings. Immortal fragrance pecked the quivering breeze. In groves that seemed moved, blossoms and trembling dance, the million children of the undying spring bloomed, pure unnumbered stars of huge delight, nestling for shelter in their immortal sky. Fairy flower masses bloomed with laughing eyes. A dancing chaos, an iridescent sea, eternized to heaven's ever-wakeful sight the crowding petal glow of marble skins, which float across the curving lids of dream. Immortal harmonies filled her listening ear, a great spontaneous utterance of the heights on titan wings of rhythmic red horn, poured from some deep spiritual heart of sound, strings trembling with the secrets of the gods. A spirit wandered happily in the wind, a spirit rooted in the leaf and stone. The voices of thought-conscious instruments along a living verge of silent strait. And from some deep, the wordless tongue of things, unfathomed, inexpressible, chanting rose, translating into a voice the unknown. A climber on the invisible stair of sound. Music, not with these few and striding steps, aspired that wander upon transient strings, which changed in its ever-new, uncounted notes in a passion of unforeseen discovery, and kept its old, unforgotten ecstasies of growing treasure in the mystic heart.
Praveen, you'd like to go on?
The consciousness that yearns to every rise of unexplored attraction and desire. It found itself again the unsatisfied dreams, hunting as if in some deep secret path, to find some lost or missed felicity. In those far lapsing symphonies she could hear, breaking through enchantments of the lavish scene, the lyric voice of a divine soul. Mixed foam and laughter tempting with its crowd, the charm of innocent Circean eyes, adventures without danger to anyone, in lands where silent wonders sing his words, from rhythmic rocks in ever-growing streams. In the harmony of an original sight, delivered from our limiting ray of thought, and the reluctance of our blinded hearts to embrace the Godhead in whatever guise. She saw all nature marvelous without thought, invaded by beauty's universal rule. Her being's fiber reached out vibrating, and claimed deep union with its outer self. And on the heart's chords made pure with these all tones. Heaven's subtleties touched unvarying force, more vivid raptures than earth's light and fear. What would be suffering here was fiery bliss. All here were passionate wind and mystic shade, divined by the inner prophet who was needs, the spirit of delight in sensuous things, turned to more sweetness that can now be dreamed, the mighty signs of which earth feels the stress, trembling because she cannot understand, and must keep obscure in forms strange and sublime. You are here, first messenger of my infinite mind, translating the language of eternal bliss. Here rapture was a common incident. The lovelinesses of whose stature fill our human pleasure of fallen lay simple shapes of careless woman, sewn on the rich brocade of Godheads.
Thank you. Amrita, you'll read.
Sixth question, the world definition forms very high. Arrived to form part of the deep physical shone by more felicity fair. Endless aspired the flagging of those heavens. Realm upon realm received your soaring view. When on what seemed one throne of the ascent, where finite and the infinite are one. Anew she beheld the strong immortal seas, who live for celestial joy and rule, the middle religion of the unfailing great. Great forms of deities fetched in deathless trust, eyes of an unborn race toward your flame, through a transparency of crystal fire, in the beauty of bodies wrought from rapturous lines, shapes of enhancing sweetness splendid breeze, feet glimmering upon the sunstone courts of mind, heaven's cardiacs bore round the eternal line. A tangle of bright bodies of moved souls, raising the close and intertwined light, the harmonized thread of love's forever journey, in the passionate oneness of a mystic joy, as if sunbeams made living and divine, the golden bosom Apsara goddess, in groves brooded from an ever breeze of grace, that floating through a luminous sapphire dream, in a cloud of raiment lit with golden wings, and gleaming footfalls, thrilling pale walls, virgin motions of wretched innocence, who know their prior for dance of gold, world linking in moonlit riddles of the heart. Impressible artists of unerring forms, magician words of sound and rhythmic words, wine hair,
Gandharvas.
Gandharvas changing to the air, the orders that shape the universal thought, the lines that tear the veil from deity's face, the lips that bring the sounds of wisdom's seed. Immortal figures and illumined brows, our great forefather in those splendors moved, timeless in power and satisfied of life, that they enjoyed the sense of all work for which we strive. Pious spheres moved poets, so the eternal thoughts that there was from one heart arrived to us, deformed by our thought, treated by costuming mind, like gods figured by the edge of yours. Seized the great voice which now a frail sounds out by difficult rapture on a mortal tongue. The stone was scrambled and sealed where come from rose. The light filled with glory and with flame, merging in waves of sympathy and sorrow, steaming like a light that drops to others' bliss, drawn by the cause of ecstasies unknown. Your human nature, playing with heaven and confined, infinity of which roams natural spell. There was a greater tranquil sweetness there, as somewhere and far under of fields, and might tell stream the heavenless scenes can be. Their blessed spirit, a stream of seeing mind, form was a tenuous raiment of the soul, colors was a visible tone of ecstasy, shape each other, immeasurable by the days. And yet, voluptuously bubbles made sensible to touch the invading spirit. The high perfected sense united with a happy vessel of the inner ray, which feeling was as the eternal smile, mighty child, and every thought was a sweet, burning God. Air was a luminous feeling, sound a voice, sunlight the soul's vision, and man light its dream. Only wide living ways of wordless calm. All was a pattern and wicked joy. Into those eyes the spirit went floating up, like an upsoaring bird, the long unseen, voicing to the accent is throbbing fire, of melody, till a pause of closing wings comes lingering in his last contented cry, and his sign with his soul is changed, delivered of his heart's body of delight. Experience mounted on joy's colored rest, through unceasable shapes and spiritual flight. The time dwelt with eternity as one, immense felicity, joy, without repose.
Thank you. So in these last lines, we receive a beautiful picture of the skylark, a little brown bird, which is remembered in poetry and in our minds, because we don't see it, we only hear it. It's a small brown bird, and it flies up from its nest from the ground, circling upward and upward and upward, higher and higher and higher. So Sri Aurobindo gives this beautiful image of that. Savitri's spirit is flying up like the lark, singing, voicing to the ascent. As he goes up, he's singing all that is in his heart. And at last he stops singing because he's closed his wings, he's coming back down to the earth. He's silent with his soul discharged. He's sung out everything that he had to share from his heart. No? He's delivered of his heart's burden of delight. So Danya, you'll read.
And we connect to the previous canto, Canto 4,
With this.
connection or...
Well, there is a connection, of course. The connection comes at the end of the previous canto, where Sri Aurobindo gives us a wonderful description of a complete transformation coming on Savitri. She is transformed into her true divine shape. And in that divine shape, she can overcome the god of death, completely overwhelmed. He can't respond to her at all in any way. So that's how that last canto of Book 4 ends. She shows who she really is, her form as the Supreme Divine Mother. And when that happens, this god of death disappears. Satyavan and Savitri are left alone. There's a translucent wall between them. And what comes next is this wonderful description of Savitri's experience in the higher worlds, the divine worlds, we can say.
We can say by Savitri's transformation.
Sorry.
Satyavan was transformed by her.
He's also set free from the shadow of death. And yes, what we get next is Savitri's experience, which continues throughout the whole of the next canto.
So both are experiencing these heavens, or only Savitri is experiencing? Like he's describing all.
Well, what is described here by the poet is Savitri's experience, yeah, which gets more and more complex as we go on. There was something else that I had thought of sharing. In my perception, with that last part of the debate between Savitri and death, Savitri had explained to death some higher, like steps going up, higher levels of consciousness. I remember 5. And it interests me. I hope it will interest some of you, because those 5 steps, ascending steps of consciousness, which she seems to explain to the god of, which Savitri seems to explain to the god of death, seem to me also to correspond to the later chapters of the Life Divine, in which similarly a higher, an ascending series of realms of consciousness are described. Perhaps we can go into that another day.
Which part of the book?
It's at the end of Book 10, Canto 4. Savitri is this is Book 10, Canto 4. Death has been challenging her, and finally he tells her that you show me the face of the Divine Mother, and then I will give you back Satyavan. If the mighty mother is with you, show me her face, let me see her. No? So then there's a break in the page. Savitri looks at death and doesn't answer. It almost seems as if he's been converted. Almost it seemed as if in his symbol shape, this is the symbol shape of death, the world's darkness had consented, had accepted heaven light. And God needed no more the inconscience screen. He doesn't need to hide himself behind a disguise. So then in the next line, a mighty transformation came on her. And the description of this transformation and how Savitri changes continues to the end of the canto, to the end of page 668, end of book 10. And Savitri looked on death and answered not. This is at the break on page 664. Then a mighty transformation came on her. A halo, an aura of light. A halo of the indwelling deity, the divine within her. The immortal's luster that had lit her face and tinted or covered its radiance in her body's house. These overflow now from the body's house, overflowing, made the air a luminous sea. In a flaming moment of apocalypse, of revelation, the incarnation thrust aside its veil. The mother unveils herself. A little figure in infinity, yet stood and seemed the Eternal's very house. As if the world's center was her very soul, and all wide space was but its outer robe. Then there's a description of the chakras. First, the forehead. A curve of the calm hauteur of the heavens, descending into earth's humility. Her forehead span vaulted the omniscient's gaze. She is looking, as she looks out, it's as if she knows everything. Her eyes were two stars that watched the universe. The power that from her being's summit reigned, that rules from her highest being, here above the top of the head, and the presence chambered in lotus secrecy. The center of the brow is like a lotus. Came down and held the center in her brow, where the mind's Lord in his control room sits. So the poet tells us more about that too, there, here. Throned on concentration's native seat, he, the mind's Lord, opens that third mysterious eye in man, the unseen's eye that looks at the unseen. When light with a golden ecstasy fills his brain, and the eternal's wisdom drives his choice, and eternal will seizes the mortal's will. These are experiences that human beings can have. So this presence comes down into Savitri. It's stirred in the lotus of her throat of song, where the voice comes from. And in her speech throbbed the immortal word. It means that she speaks something, she says something to death. Her life, her whole life being, sounded with the steps of the world soul, moving in harmony with the cosmic thought, the thought of the universe. And he tells us more about this presence and how it enters into Savitri. As glides God's Son into the mystic cave where hides his light from the pursuing gods. That presence glided into the lotus of Savitri's heart and woke in it the force that alters fate. Whatever's fixed in the universe can be changed by that presence. Then it plunged into a navel's lotus depth, lodged in the little life nature's narrow home. On the body's longing grew heaven rapture's flower and made desire a pure celestial flame. It broke into the cave, the lower cave, where coiled world energy sleeps, and smote. It wakes up the 1,000-hooded serpent force that rises up, the Kundalini. That blazing towered and clasped the world self above. It joined matter's dumbness, the silence of matter, to the spirit's hush, and filled earth's acts, what we do with our physical bodies, with the spirit's silent power. Thus changed, Savitri waited for the word to speak. Death has challenged her. Now she's waiting to see what will come. Eternity looked into the eyes of death, and darkness saw God's living reality. Then a voice was heard, a voice that seemed the stillness self, the silence, or the low, calm utterance of infinity when it speaks to the silence in the heart of sleep. This is what the voice says. It's emerging from Savitri. I hail thee, I salute you, almighty and victorious death. Thou grandiose darkness of the infinite, O void, O emptiness that makes room for all to be, makes room for everything else to exist. Hunger that gnawest at the universe as if it's a beast swallowing up the universe, consuming the cold remnants of the suns, and eats the whole world with thy jaws of fire. You who are waster of the energy that has made the stars. You inconscience, carrier of the seeds of thought. Nescience, not knowing, in which all knowledge sleeps entombed as if in a tomb, and slowly emerges in its hollow breast, wearing the mind's mask of bright ignorance. So Savitri says to death, thou, you are my shadow and my instrument, my tool. I have given thee thy awful shape of dread that makes people fearful. I have given thee thy sharp sword of terror and grief and pain. I have given it to you in order to force the soul of man to struggle for light on the brevity, on the shortness of his half-conscious days. Thou, death, art his spur. A spur is something that drives you to go faster. This is for man. Death inspires the will for continuance in the soul of man, forcing it to struggle for light. So she says, live, death, a while. Now Savitri is speaking as the Supreme Divine Mother. Live, death, a while, she says. Be still my instrument. Continue to work for me. One day, man, too, human beings, shall know thy fathomless heart, your deep heart of silence, and what it contains, the brooding peace of night, and grave obedience to eternal law. Man too shall know and understand the calm, inflexible pity in thy gaze. But now, O timeless mightiness, stand aside, step aside, leave the path of my incarnate force. That's the incarnate force of Savitri herself. So the mother tells death, leave the path of my force which has taken this form. Release the soul of the world called Satyavan, freed from thy clutch of pain and ignorance, so that he can stand master of life and fate, that he can be what he is truly meant to be, man's representative in the house of God, the maid of wisdom and the spouse or husband of light, the eternal bridegroom of the eternal bride. This is what she spoke. And Death is still unconvinced. He's still resisting her. Although he saw, he's refusing still to see. Unshakable. He just stands there claiming his right. And she forces him to bow. His spirit bowed. His will obeyed the law of its own nature, binding even on gods. This is an interesting statement from Sri Aurobindo, that the law to follow your own nature, this is binding even on gods. So the two, Savitri and Death, opposed each other face to face.
How is love binds even gods?
It means that it applies to them,
Even to gods?
even to gods. They have to follow their nature. So her light, the light of Savitri, is like a pressure of intolerable force weighing on Death's head. No? Even though he won't bow his head and his breast is still stubborn, still light, the Savitri's divine light, like a burning tongue, licked up his thoughts. He can't think anymore. He was always so clever with his arguments. Light was a luminous torture in his heart. Light coursed as if it's running, a splendid agony through his nerves. His darkness muttered, perishing in her blaze. Her mastering word commanded every limb. He has to do what she tells him, and left no room for his enormous will. His will seems to be pushed out into some helpless space and can't get back in to him, leaves him empty. He called to night, but she fell shuddering back. She turns away from him. He turned to the inconscient for support, the inconscient from which he was born. His vast, sustaining self, it drew him back towards boundless vacancy, emptiness, as if by himself to swallow up himself. He called to his strength, but it refused his call. His body was eaten by light, his spirit devoured, eaten up. At last he knew defeat inevitable, that he can't win against death. So he leaves the shape that he's been wearing. He lets it crumble up. He abandons the hope to make man's soul his prey and to force to be mortal the immortal spirit. He simply runs away. Afar he fled, shunning her dreaded touch, and refuge took in the retreating night. In the dream twilight of that symbol world, the dire, the terrible universal shadow of death disappeared, vanishing into the void, the emptiness from which it came. And as if its original cause has been removed, the twilight realm, that dream twilight of the earthly real, passed away, fading from their souls. And Satyavan and Savitri were alone. But neither stirred. Between those figures rose a mute, invisible, and translucent wall. In the long blank moment's pause, nothing could move. All waited on the unknown, inscrutable will. Inscrutable, we can't read what the will of the Supreme will be now. So that is the end of Book 10. It leads us to the beginning of Book 11, the Book of Everlasting Day, which we can take up another time.
One point is touching me again more. It is on page 667, line 619. The third line from down. And what Savitri said about the change, that the spirit is immortal and not mortal, or pushed down from death and
Yes.
normal life.
Yes.
I think this is then also something which in the next book comes on the immortality.
Yes. Yes.
In a way, it's a key, you know.
What a key to what would you say?
A key to what is in what we have to strive forward. That the spirit is immortal in us. That Savitri wants to move forward.
Yes. Yes. Yes, there's still a lot more wonderful knowledge to discover in this book. Shall we stop there for today?
The dim mask has worn a wonderful slain, whose gloom had outlined for the devil unknown the obscure, disastrous figure of the god. As if the golden calyx of the flower, air visible on music swayed, a lotus of light, petal ecstasy, took shape out of the tremulous heart of sea. Death's somber sound was far from nature.